We completed a study at Cleveland State, Ohio State, and Marietta College jointly did a study on the economic development opportunity with the Ohio shale, with the shale formations in Ohio. We specifically looked at the Utica, and we published that study in March. It was sponsored by the Ohio Shale Coalition, which is primarily service industries as opposed to producing companies that make up its membership. And as Rhonda had pointed out, we came out with our study maybe 4 or 5 months after theirs and had reached a lot of the same results. So I'm not going to go through a lot of that, but I will just point out a couple of things, because I think Rhonda covered it pretty well. One thing I wanted to point out was in 2014, we showed the value added, which is equivalent to the gross domestic product of about $4.8 billion. Just to put this into perspective, this is about 1% of the gross domestic product for the state of Ohio. And 1% may not seem like a whole lot, but you have to take into account that we haven't seen 1% growth in any year in the last 15 years in Ohio. So this industry by itself is going to provide more growth than we've seen in the state of Ohio in the last 15 years, any single year. So that is really about all I will say about our study. Instead, I'm going to talk about what developments that have taken place since then, and try to put this in a little bit of a perspective as to what's going on in the energy world. Well, at the time we did our study, we had no data whatsoever. As Rhonda pointed out, you have to rely on industry experts to come in and tell you what's going to happen. And so we did. And one of the things we projected was a drilling rate of wells which is the primary driver of service jobs in the state of Ohio. And we projected, we were pretty conservative on those numbers, but actually they were almost identical to the ones that TOGA came up with. And they've proven to be actually less than what we're actually seeing so far. The drilling rates are a little bit faster than we expected. We did get some production results from a couple of companies. Once a year, the companies are required to publish their yearly production numbers in order when they pay their severance tax and the ad valorem taxes. And so we got those numbers. They were published in March, and we'll get next March a whole lot more information. But we did get a couple of data points that we had. And then the other thing that has transpired since March is that the state of Ohio came out with a new map showing where they think the current ideas of where the most productive areas are going to be in the Utica Shale. This is what we had anticipated for the number of wells to be drilled in Ohio, and we had 160 for 2012, and it's going to exceed that number. The new permits are coming, and while not all the permitted wells are drilled, and certainly not drilled in the same year they're permitted, it does give us a sense that the activity is rapidly increasing. This is what we projected for production, and this is really an average well based on virtually no information at that time that we had. It was just based on guessing what we'd seen in other shale formations, and just trying to determine what an average well would look like in a play that has oil, gas, and natural gas liquids in it. This is what was reported in the severance tax records by Chesapeake for 5 wells that they drilled in 2011 and produced from. The most impressive was the Harrison County well, which is producing at a rate of about almost 3 BCF a year. That's actually comparable to the kind of production you might expect to see from a really good well in the Gulf of Mexico. So this is a really remarkable well in terms of production. What we don't know from the records is how much of that is liquid, natural gas liquids, and how much of it is going to be natural gas. And that will be important to determining the financial viability near term with a lot of these wells. Because with gas prices depressed as they are, you can see some of these wells, if you're producing a half or 3/4 of a BCF of gas a year at $2.50 an MCF, it's not very attractive to drill a well like that when you're spending $10 million to drill it. So the liquid part of it we don't know because that's not put in the service records. But we have reason to believe that there is a significant liquid component to these wells. These are all east of here in what is more expected to be more the gas area. The other wells that was reported came from Anadarko, and I'm not entirely sure why they reported it because they didn't have to. Mostly these companies prefer to keep these as trade secrets because it's a competitive advantage they have with their other companies. But Anadarko chose to publish some of their production, and I chose one of their wells. This was in Noble County, which I think is south of here, and they had 20-day results. And this was actually, of their 2 wells they reported, the lesser of the 2 wells. And what really is interesting about this well is that it's heavily oil producing and not so heavily natural gas producing. And if you just look at this number here, that 9,500 barrels of oil per day, and you project that out for a year, you get around 173,000 barrels of oil in a year. And if you do the math on that at $100 a barrel, that's around $17 million returned on a year. That's the kind of well that oil and gas companies are going to be eager to drill. And we'll see a lot of that type of activity going on in Ohio, I think. This is the new map that was produced, and apparently it's controversial. But as you can see, that the parts that are really attractive have moved from Tuscarawas County up through Trumbull County as the key parts. And the only thing I can say about this is that this map will change. And it's going to change every time they get new data and publish it. So what are some of the trends that we're seeing in the industry that's going to affect, I think, how things play out in Ohio? Well, first of all, natural gas has some trends that are really of interest. Natural gas consumption actually had been dropped, and in 2008, as part of the recession, it dropped by historic amounts. About 2.5% a year it had dropped at that point. It started to pick up again in 2011 after the price of natural gas crashed from what was around $12 to $15 an MCF down to about $3 to $4 an MCF, and now it's at around $2.50 an MCF. The increase is going up now, again around 4% a year, but the Energy Information Agency projects that it will increase to about 20% more by the year 2035. And I think that's a pretty conservative number if you're looking at prices that are in the range that they are talking about projected for the natural gas business for the next 20 years. I think we're likely to see significantly more than 20% growth in the natural gas industry. Production. In 2000, 2% of the nation's natural gas came from shale. Today, it's almost 40%, and it continues to grow every year. And the pricing, the Energy Information Agency projects $6.50 an MCF by the year 2035. I can tell you that any company right now, if you could go to a natural gas company and get a contract from them that has fixed pricing at $6.50 an MCF, most companies would jump on that because that's a pretty good price. Unfortunately, you can't get a long-term contract on natural gas anymore. You used to be able to do that back in the 60s and 70s, but that led to all that take-or-pay litigation that went on throughout the United States and a lot of bankrupt companies. And so nowadays, you never see anything more than a 5-year contract. Except you'll see a long-term contract that's variable. But if in fact these numbers are correct, that we're looking at $6.50 an MCF by the year 2035, I think we can expect to see a very strong transition from coal and oil into the natural gas sector. A couple of other things that are really of interest about the natural gas pricing is one of them is that historically natural gas has always been tied to oil production, and in recent years it has been decoupled. And the reason it's tied to oil production is because they are tied to the cost of making or drilling for oil and producing oil. But now it's tied more to peak energy on the grid. And that's because natural gas is used as a peak energy generator. And so we've seen that decoupling from oil, and right now it's huge. The oil is selling for around $100 a barrel, which is maybe 10 to 15 times the value on an MMBTU basis that natural gas is selling for. The other thing that's really of interest is the byproduct nature of natural gas. If you look back historically to when the petrochemical business was created in the United States, it was during the 60s and 70s when natural gas at that time was a byproduct of oil production. And in fact, they used to flare large volumes of natural gas every year, probably a TCF of gas every year would be flared in Texas and Louisiana. Because when they produce oil, you get what they call casing head gas, or associated gas that comes out with the oil. They started passing conservation laws in the 70s that required companies to market that. But at the time, you could tie up large volumes of natural gas for very cheap, like 20, 30 cents an MCF for 20 years. That situation is long gone. We haven't seen that situation in a long time. But it's starting to come back here in Ohio now. And the reason is because the oil is going to drive production of natural gas in the Utica Shale. And we'll start to see natural gas again being produced as a byproduct. So even though we may be in a bubble with the surplus of natural gas, the companies will be driven to continue to drill for natural gas, in part because it's a byproduct of oil, and also in part because they have primary lease terms that require them to drill or they lose their leases. So there'll be, we're going to continue to see Ohio drilling, significant amount of drilling in Ohio, even though natural gas prices are depressed right now. On the oil side, we've had consumption has dropped about 8% in the last several years, since 2006. So we're going down in our usage of oil. This is fueled in part by improving fuel economy standards, but principally by people just driving less. And everybody seems to attribute this to a cultural change. Young people prefer telecommunications devices and computers and things like that over driving, which was not how it was in my generation, obviously. Production is going up. The amount of production in the United States of oil has gone up around 25% in the last several years, and we're seeing a lot more, roughly 60% or so of our imports has dropped down to about 45% for imports of oil, which has been hugely advantageous to the country. And the other thing that's really surprising is that North Dakota has moved into second place now as an oil producing state ahead of Alaska. And most of us think about Prudhoe Bay as being one of the largest oil discoveries ever made in the United States. Well, the Bakken fields and the Utica fields are going to be comparable in size, at least an order of magnitude size as Prudhoe Bay. And so Ohio will be the next major player in oil in the United States.